Ever wondered what it really takes to shut down arrogant, power-hungry bullies? Picture this: an Ho Queen Bee and her little squad pounding on your door, barking orders like they own the place, and then, just minutes later, they're standing there dumbfounded when they realize you actually own the entire valley. The trick: smart preparation, a dash of courage, and knowing your rights better than anyone else. Once you understand exactly what you have, no one dares cross you. This is the story of how I turned an entire valley's biggest troublemakers into the butt of the joke. If you want to defend your property, stand your ground, and silence any so-called Karen before they can even get started, listen up, because the same strategy can work for you. The morning haze was still hanging over the Soma Hills when I heard the crunch of gravel in my driveway. I'd spent the last few months enjoying peaceful mornings on my grandmother's old vineyard, a broken bar until now. Through the kitchen window of the farmhouse I'd been restoring, I spotted a spotless white BMW rolling in like it owned the road. Out stepped a woman in a sharp charcoal suit, blonde hair pulled back so tightly it could double as a weapon. Two younger people followed, matching polos, clipboards in hand, like they were preparing for battle. Her heels struck the gravel in perfect rhythm, each click announcing she meant business. I knew exactly who she was before she spoke a word: Veronica Slate, self-crowned ruler of the newly built Silvercrest Hills HOA, and a former bankruptcy lawyer who'd made a second career out of turning farmland into gated luxury developments. I stepped outside in my work clothes, coffee mug in hand, and caught her scanning my property like she'd discovered a roach problem. "Mr. Vale, I presume," she said, not even pausing for confirmation. "I'm Veronica Slate, president of the Silvercrest Hills Homeowners Association. We need to address some serious violations." Her two assistants closed in on either side like bodyguards. One was already snapping photos of my grandfather's old John Deere, the same one I used to clear overgrown areas by the main road. It wasn't much to look at, but it had been part of this land longer than any of her hoes' houses. "That eyesore," she said, pointing with a perfectly manicured finger, "is in direct violation of our community aesthetic standards. It disrupts the visual harmony we've worked so hard to create." I took a long sip of coffee, letting the absurdity sink in. Here she was, standing ankle-deep in my muddy driveway, surrounded by grapevines and the smell of manure, lecturing me about visual harmony. "Ma'am," I said evenly, "this is private land. It's been in my family for 3 generations. I'm not sure what authority you think you have here, but I'd be happy to see your paperwork." Her smile didn't falter, but I caught the irritation in her eyes. "Mr. Vale, I think you're misunderstanding how things work now. Thanks to the HOA's expanded jurisdiction agreement with the county, we oversee property standards for this entire agricultural corridor, including your farm." She tossed a hand toward the 70 acres of vines behind me like they were nothing. That's when I noticed something. Not one of them had shown me official documentation, a permit to inspect, or even real identification. "I'd like to see that agreement," I said, opening my phone's voice recorder, "and some ID from your inspectors here." The young man with the camera shifted uncomfortably. The woman with the clipboard leaned in to whisper something to Slate. Her smile thinned. "Mr. Vale, you don't understand the seriousness of this. I've successfully converted a dozen agricultural properties in this county. I know exactly what I'm doing, and what legal tools I have." She paused like she expected me to cave. "I'm giving you the chance to cooperate voluntarily. You really don't want us to take other measures?" I pulled an old leather portfolio from my shirt pocket, and the same one my grandmother carried to town meetings. Inside were documents I'd been studying since inheriting the land. "Before you make threats," I said, "you should know my grandmother left me some very specific water rights. Old, legally protected rights that stretch across this entire valley." Her composure cracked just slightly. The camera guy lowered his lens. "Water rights?" she repeated, trying to keep her voice steady. "That's irrelevant to landscaping compliance." "Oh, it's very relevant," I replied, closing the portfolio but keeping it visible. "Any major development that affects watershed or preservation zones has to account for existing rights. And according to these papers, some of those rights go far beyond my fence line." I nodded toward her perfect lawns and ornamental fountains in Silvercrest Hills. "I'm sure a former lawyer like you understands how messy California water law can be." The jab landed. Her jaw tightened. For the first time, She didn't look entirely in control. "This isn't over, Mr. Vale," she said, signaling her team. "Expect a formal notice of violation within 48 hours. The HOA takes our community standards very seriously." She clicked away toward her BMW, throwing one last line over her shoulder. "And those water rights won't help you if the county decides your operation is a public nuisance." As the SUV rolled off, dust coating my grandmother's prize roses, I couldn't help but smile. She thought I was just some Matilda Macron v farmer ripe for her development schemes. She had no idea what she just stepped into. Just as promised, Veronica's notice of violation landed in my mailbox 2 days later, delivered by certified mail like some ceremonial warning shot. It was only the beginning. Within hours of signing for it, my phone started lighting up with calls from uneasy neighbors, and the Silvercrest Hills Facebook group was suddenly buzzing with posts about hazardous chemicals being used at the old vineyard. The accusations were dressed up as friendly concern, hints about mysterious spraying and worries over groundwater contamination. In reality, the only things I'd applied to the vines were organic fertilizers and the occasional splash of neem oil for pests. Truth, however, wasn't the point. Veronica was waging a psychological campaign, rallying my neighbors into unwitting foot soldiers for her cause. Her most creative strike came in the form of a video that appeared anonymously in several local social media groups. In it, a man in a bright safety vest conducted what looked like an official inspection of my wine storage barn. A calm, authoritative narrator walked viewers through serious hazards and unsafe chemical storage that supposedly endanger the community. The editing was professional, complete with ominous close-ups of electrical panels and moody shots of wine barrels lit to look sinister. I played it twice before catching on as someone had paid for a staged inspection designed to look like legitimate documentation. The timing was strategic, dropping just as people were settling in after work with a glass of wine in hand. But in her effort to make it perfect, Veronica had made a mistake. On my third viewing, I caught a faint detail in the audio. While the inspector discussed fire hazards, a woman's voice in the background gave instructions. "Make sure you get a close-up of those electrical boxes. A broken bar. That's perfect, Marcus. Now let's get the chemical storage angle." The voice was subtle, buried under the narrator's track, but it was there. Someone had forgotten to mute the original audio before dubbing the script. I saved the file, silently thanking Marcus for keeping his mic live during the performance. That's when Sophie arrived. My 26-year-old niece had planned to visit for a break from her final year at Stanford Law, but her timing couldn't have been better. She pulled up in her well-worn Honda Civic, found me juggling my third neighbor call of the day, and dropped her duffel on the porch. "Uncle Ethan," she said, giving me a hug that smelled of too much coffee and too little sleep, "what's this I hear about you starting a neighborhood war?" I showed her the video and the Facebook posts. Her legal mind kicked in instantly. "This is some advanced small-town character assassination," she said, replaying the footage on her laptop. "Whoever did this knows exactly how to stir public outrage without technically crossing into defamation." Then Sophie spotted something I'd missed entirely. She paused the video, pointing to the timestamp in one of the posts. "This went up in the late afternoon. A broken bar, but look at the shadows in the footage. That's morning light, maybe mid-morning." And here she zoomed in on an electrical panel. "Alice isn't even hooked up. The conduit just ends. This whole thing is staged." We spent the next hour dissecting the video frame by frame, building a list of continuity errors and false claims. The inspector was just an actor, following a script, pointing at hazards that didn't exist. The next morning brought a blow that hit far harder. A certified letter from my bank. My agricultural loan, the one my grandmother had taken to upgrade irrigation before she passed, was now flagged as overdue. $80,000, due in full within a month, or foreclosure proceedings would begin. Sitting at the kitchen table with that letter, looking out over 70 acres of prime vineyard, I felt the weight of my family's legacy pressing down. For the first time since inheriting the land, I considered Veronica's unspoken offer a sellout. Pay the debt, walk away. It would be easier. I could move into a condo somewhere far away and let her carve the valley into just another soulless development. Sophie walked in as I stared at the letter over my third cup of coffee. "You're not really thinking about giving up, are you?" she asked, Grandma Margaret would haunt you forever if you let an HOA bully push you off land that's been ours since the 50s. She was right, but knowing that and feeling ready to fight were two different things. Sophie, I'm not a farmer, I told her. I'm a retired aerospace engineer who thought making wine and growing vegetables sounded peaceful. I don't know the first thing about battling people who do this for a living. Her expression hardened into determination. Good thing I'm taking a semester off, she said, like she'd been saving the announcement. I need a break from law school, and you need someone who understands these games. She opened her laptop and began typing with the same intensity that got her into Stanford in the first place. Sophie leaned back in her chair, eyes bright with resolve. Besides, she said, I've been looking for a way to put all of that property law I've been studying into practice. And Uncle Ethan, after seeing that video, I'm convinced this isn't about a couple of tractors or some aesthetic violation. There's a bigger game going on here. Almost on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Home meeting tomorrow evening at the community center. Formal liens and violation penalties to be discussed. Attendance strongly recommended. A versus the initials said it all. Veronica wasn't backing off. She was turning up the heat. The Silvercrest Hills Community Center had that stale mix of burnt coffee and worn carpet that makes even friendly gatherings feel like boardroom battles. By the time the meeting started, the small space was crammed with residents, folding chairs wedged between fake plants and inspirational posters about neighborly unity. Sophie came with me, her bag stuffed with HOA statutes, Californian agricultural codes, and enough printouts to choke a paper shredder. Veronica sat at the front like a judge presiding over a trial, a neat stack of official documents in front of her. Beside her sat a slim man in a tailored suit, Rolex flashing each time he checked the time, clearly wishing he were somewhere else. He introduced himself as David Mackenzie, an attorney specializing in HOA enforcement. His voice was smooth, practiced at the kind that makes complex legal threats sound almost polite. Clicking through a PowerPoint, he managed to make my grandfather's tractor look like an environmental hazard straight out of a disaster film. What we have here, Mackenzie began, is a clear violation of the covenants, conditions, and restrictions governing this agricultural corridor. The map he displayed showed the entire area, Silvercrest Hills and surrounding properties. Mine included, marked in a deep shade of regulatory red. After 20 minutes of jargon about liens, penalties, and something called an abatement order, he finally landed on his big reveal. The Silvercrest Hills HOA is prepared to place a $50,000 lien on DeVale's property, with additional daily fines of $500 until full compliance is achieved. Furthermore, we recommend the county issue an abatement order to remove all non-compliant agricultural equipment immediately. Most of the room nodded as though this were perfectly reasonable. I stood, slowly, and pulled out my grandmother's old leather portfolio. Before you start slapping liens on my land, I said, there's something you and Mrs. Slate should probably see. The room went still. Veronica's smile faltered as I slid a document with a federal seal onto the table. This is a certificate designating my family's vineyard as part of a federally recognized agricultural preservation zone, issued through the National Association of Wine Growers and the Department of Agriculture. It means this vineyard is protected under federal law. The silence that followed was almost satisfying. Mackenzie's polished demeanor slipped for a moment, while Veronica leaned forward as if she could read the fine print from across the room. What this means, I continued, is that any development impacting soil composition, the water table, or the organic certification of this vineyard requires a federal environmental review. That includes residential landscaping with chemical treatments, decorative water features, and certain types of road construction. Mackenzie recovered quickly. Mr. Vale, federal designations are important, yes, but they don't override local zoning or HOA covenant enforcement. The violations we've noted are about aesthetics and community standards, not farming practices. I could see the doubt flicker in his eyes. This wasn't the simple compliance case he'd expected. That's when Sophie stood. Mr. Mackenzie, she said evenly, you might want to revisit the supremacy clause regarding federal agricultural law. Federal environmental protections override local ordinances where there's conflict, and organic certification explicitly prohibits the kinds of chemical landscaping most HOAs require. She connected her laptop to the projector and began scrolling through statutes and case citations. Additionally, the Clean Water Act gives certified organic operations priority protection for groundwater resources. A ripple of uneasy murmurs ran through the crowd. The realization was dawning that their tidy community could be sitting on a legal and financial headache. Veronica's complexion had gone pale, her glances at Mackenzie more frequent, like she was silently willing him to fix this. "This is absurd," she snapped at last, her composure cracking. "You can't just wave around some old paperwork and think it cancels legitimate community concerns." But her tone had lost the confident edge it now carried, the shrillness of someone who knew the game had shifted. "Mrs. Slate," I said, closing the portfolio but leaving it on the table in plain view, "I'm sure you're skilled at what you do, but this land has been in my family for 3 generations, and my grandmother made absolutely certain our rights were locked in tight. I should mention," I said, holding the certificate aloft, "that my grandmother left behind some very particular water rights records, the ones that extend well beyond the borders of this vineyard." The room fell into a heavy silence as the weight of that statement settled over the crowd. In California, water rights weren't just about irrigation, they were about who truly controlled development, who held first claim to resources, and who carried real leverage in any land dispute. "You're bluffing," Veronica said, but there was no real conviction behind her words. "Even if you do have some dusty old water rights, they wouldn't apply to community standards." That was my cue to play my last card for the night. "Well, Mrs. Slate, I suppose we'll find out next week when you bring your fire marshal and police contacts to shut down my wine storage," I said, with just enough of a smile to let her know I'd anticipated her move. Because interfering with a federally protected agricultural operation tends to require a few more permits than you currently have. As the meeting dissolved into scattered murmurs and uneasy whispers, I gathered my documents and headed for the door with Sophie right behind me. For 5 glorious days after that, the neighborhood was silent long enough for me to almost believe Veronica had decided to retreat. Then came the morning that shattered that illusion. At exactly 5 a.m., the crunch of tires on gravel yanked me from sleep, followed by the unmistakable slam of multiple car doors, the kind that signaled official business. I peered out my bedroom window and saw 3 police cruisers, a white county fire marshal truck, and Veronica's BMW lined up in my driveway like a parade of authority. From the lead cruiser emerged Lieutenant Parker, a solidly built man in his mid-40s, radiating the practiced confidence of someone long accustomed to small-town power. 2 younger officers trailed behind, their expressions betraying the wish to be anywhere else. Fire Marshal Rodriguez followed, clutching a clipboard thick enough to choke a horse, and finally, Veronica herself stepped out, wearing the satisfied grin of someone convinced they were about to claim victory. I threw on some clothes, still tying my boots, as Parker approached with an official-looking document. "Mr. Vale," he announced in a tone that expected compliance, "I'm Lieutenant Parker with the Sonoma County Sheriff's Department. We're here to serve you a notice of violation for unsafe storage conditions in your wine production facility." He gestured toward my storage barn, a solid structure my grandfather built in the early 60s, one that had shrugged off half a century of California weather without a creak. "Fire Marshal Rodriguez has documented multiple safety hazards that pose an immediate threat to public welfare," Parker continued. Behind him, Veronica stood with arms folded, her triumphant expression locked in place. Rodriguez stepped forward, reading from what sounded like a pre-written statement about electrical issues, poor ventilation, and hazardous chemical storage. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were citing chemicals in a building that held nothing but oak barrels, glass bottles, and a perfectly legal electrical setup that had been grandfathered in decades ago. "We'll need to place this facility under administrative hold until a full safety inspection can be conducted," Rodriguez said, pulling out yellow caution tape like he was sealing off a crime scene. "No access will be allowed until every violation is resolved and cleared by the county." Parker nodded as if this were routine, though his backup officers looked increasingly uneasy about the whole spectacle. That's when Sophie appeared at my side, phone in hand and already recording. She'd been documenting everything since the fake safety video incident, and her timing was impeccable. "Officers," she said, her tone sharp with legal precision, "may I see the court order authorizing the seizure of private property?" The question landed like a splash of ice water. Parker glanced at his paperwork, then at Sophie, then at Rodriguez, as if hoping one of them would answer for him. "This is a notice of violation, not a seizure," he said, his earlier confidence thinning. "We have administrative authority to secure unsafe facilities." "Administrative authority," Sophie replied evenly, "requires either a warrant or proof of immediate public danger. Which legal standard are you invoking?" She adjusted her stance to ensure her camera captured not only the officials but also Veronica's reaction, and she was live streaming it to her followers. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the viewer count climbing. 500, 1,000, 2,000 people now watching a standoff between small-town officials and a man in work boots standing next to a wine barn. Comments began pouring in, and I saw someone had already posted the stream to a local news Facebook group. "Lieutenant Parker," I said, keeping my voice calm and deliberate for the growing online audience, "I'd like to see the court order authorizing you to close my facility." His jaw tightened. This clearly wasn't the easy intimidation job Veronica had promised him. "Mr. Vale, we don't need a court order for emergency safety enforcement," he said, though his gaze kept drifting to Sophie's camera. "The fire marshal has documented hazards that fall under county emergency powers." That's when I decided it was time to end their little show. I stepped back into the house, retrieved my grandmother's leather portfolio, and returned to find them all looking a little less certain. Veronica's smile had started to stiffen, and Rodriguez kept staring at his clipboard as if it might magically provide the legal backing they were missing. "Before you put any tape on that building," I said, opening the portfolio with deliberate care, "a broken bar. There's something all of you need to understand about this land," I said, drawing out the moment. As I opened the worn leather portfolio, first came the federal agricultural certification, the same one that had rattled Mackenzie during the HOA showdown. But I didn't stop there. Beneath it was another document, this one stamped with even more authoritative seals and signatures. And tucked behind that sat a folder labeled Soma Valley Regional Authority A Water Rights. The stillness that followed was almost airy, as if even the birds had stopped to listen. I lifted a certificate that radiated enough official weight to halt a federal probe in its tracks. "Ladies, gentlemen, and Mrs. Slate," I said, letting the tension hang in the air, "this isn't just a wine storage site. This is the primary water management hub for the entire Soma Valley agricultural corridor." Parker's expression shifted through a spectrum of colors as the meaning landed. Rodriguez abandoned his clipboard mid-sentence, and Veronica's confident smile collapsed faster than a cart house in a gust of wind. "What I'm holding here," I added, drawing out the final paper with a theatrical flair my grandmother would have approved of, "proves my family holds controlling interest of 51% in the Soma Valley Water Management Company." Sophie's live stream counter climbed into the thousands. I went on, my tone steady. "Every drop flowing to Silvercrest Hills, every irrigation line in this valley, every fountain and pool in your meticulously planned neighborhood relies on infrastructure that runs directly through my property." The silence was heavy as the group processed that they just attempted to shut down the water supply for half the county. "That's not possible," Veronica muttered, but even she didn't sound convinced. Parker was already easing toward his cruiser, his radio buzzing with an impatient voice on the other end. Rodriguez quietly rolled up his caution tape, eager to retreat. I turned to Veronica, knowing Sophie's camera was capturing every second. "Mrs. Slate, perhaps now would be a good time to explain to these gentlemen your deal with Granite Peak Holdings, the one where you've been selling parcels you don't actually own." Her face lost all color. What had started as an intimidation stunt was rapidly unraveling into a public unmasking of what looked a lot like a massive fraud operation. Later that day, I sat at my grandmother's old kitchen table, surrounded by a fortress of legal documents. The live stream had exploded across social media, picked up by regional news outlets, but the attention was already feeling less like victory and more like a weight. Sophie had been juggling calls from reporters while I tried to digest the reality. The water rights were genuine, The controlling stake legitimate, but leveraging them meant plunging into a political and legal battlefield far beyond any host quabble. For the first time, I seriously considered cashing out and walking away. That's when I noticed the blinking red light on my grandmother's ancient landline answering machine, a relic I'd never bothered to disconnect. I figured it was just old condolences or business messages. Still, something compelled me to press play. Her voice came through the static, steady, warm, unmistakable. "Ethan, sweetheart, a broken bar if you're hearing this. I'm gone, and you've probably figured out this farm is a lot more complicated than it looks." I froze, every muscle tight. The land's not just for grapes, honey. It's about water, about community, about making sure the right people are in charge of the things that matter. You'll want to sell when it gets hard, I know you will, and there'll be people lining up to make it sound easy. But this system, this land, a broken bar, it's the backbone of everything your grandfather and I built. Without it, the farming families here lose everything. She went on, explaining the history of the water agreements, the trust the valley had placed in our family, and the responsibility to protect it. Her final words cut straight through my hesitation. "Fight for it, Ethan. Not just for USA, for everyone who calls this valley home." By the time the tape clicked off, I knew my choice. An hour later, Sophie appeared, practically vibrating with energy, her laptop under one arm and a stack of courthouse records in the other. "Uncle Ethan, you have to see this," she said, spinning the screen toward me. It displayed a dizzying web of property transfers, HOA filings, and development contracts, a financial shell game disguised as neighborhood planning. "I've been tracking every land transfer and permit for the past 5 years," she explained. "Veronica's empire isn't just Shaka, it's built on a legal fault line. 3 months ago, she pushed through paperwork to reclassify 8 agricultural parcels as mixed-use residential, and yes, your land's on that list. Even though she doesn't own it." Sophie's investigation went deeper than I imagined. "She's been offloading development rights for land she doesn't even own," Sophie explained, clicking through a series of damning email attachments and bank statements she'd managed to dig up using her law school research network. Granite Peak Holdings has paid her $8 million in so-called consulting and coordination fees for projects that can't legally move forward without water rights approval. It was a scheme that balanced on the edge of genius and audacity, selling the same plots, on paper, multiple times to different buyers. Veronica used the HOA as a Section 8, counting on small landowners being either too intimidated or too financially strapped to resist once the heavy machinery and legal threats arrived. But the real shock came when Sophie revealed the correspondence between Veronica and Lieutenant Parker. "Check this out," she said, pulling up emails that read more like a partnership log than a concerned citizen talking to law enforcement. 3 weeks ago, $50,000 wired from one of her shell companies straight into Parker's personal account. The memo says A consultation services, but that's exactly when she started pushing him to come down on you. The evidence laid out an organized intimidation racket, a Parker providing the muscle and official authority, Veronica orchestrating the legal cover and funneling the money. "This isn't just an HOA spat anymore, Uncle Ethan," Sophie said. "This is large-scale criminal fraud." We spent the rest of the afternoon building a case file tight enough to make a federal prosecutor grin. Granite Peak's history was a rogues gallery of failed developments and environmental wreckage across 3 states, and now they'd set their sights on our county. Veronica was their inside operator, leveraging her legal background and HOA ties to grease the wheels for projects that barely existed outside of paperwork. Her targets were always family farms like Mania, just big enough to tempt developers, but too small to withstand a prolonged legal siege. By evening, calls started coming in from other valley landowners who had seen the live stream and were beginning to connect the dots. By dinner, we had a dozen families ready to stand together under the banner Sophie had already named the Valley Defense Coalition. Each brought their own documents, filling in more pieces of Veronica's elaborate puzzle. "We need to make this public," Sophie insisted, uploading the evidence to a secure server and drafting press releases for morning distribution. "Tomorrow's meeting isn't about HOA violations anymore. Tomorrow, we take the whole thing down." The following morning, our plans were unexpectedly upended. Instead of the community meeting, We were notified that Judge Helena Rodriguez from the county Superior Court had called an emergency hearing to address serious allegations of fraud and abuse of process affecting multiple property owners. It would be held via video conference at the community center, and everyone involved was expected to participate. The same room that had recently hosted Veronica's smug performance was now overflowing with more than 200 residents, 3 news crews, and an air so thick with tension you could cut it with a letter opener. Right at the top of the hour, Judge Rodriguez appeared on the large screen, robed in black and wearing an expression that suggested she had zero patience for games. "We are here to address accusations of fraudulent property transfers, misuse of HOA authority, and potential criminal conspiracy involving public officials," she announced, her tone sharp and authoritative. Papers on her desk looked suspiciously like the evidence Sophie and I had compiled. "Mr. Vale, Mrs. Slate, Mr. Mackenzie, and Lieutenant Parker, you are all required participants in these proceedings." Veronica sat front and center beside Mackenzie, both looking like they'd aged years overnight. Mackenzie buried himself in papers, while Veronica stared at her phone, possibly calculating how quickly she could move money offshore. Parker stood near the back, sweating through his uniform and eyeing the exit like it might be his best option. The room buzzed with whispered conversations, many residents clutching printed copies of the leaked emails and property filings that had mysteriously appeared on the community Facebook page in the middle of the night. "Mr. Mackenzie," the judge began, "please present your client's position regarding the liens and enforcement actions taken against the Vale property." He launched into a polished speech about HOA authority, but only made it a few minutes before Judge Rodriguez interrupted with a question that landed like a grenade. "Counselor, are you aware your client filed property reclassification requests for parcels she does not own?" The silence was deafening. Mackenzie's words caught in his throat as he turned toward Veronica, who looked like she'd just been addressed in a language she didn't understand. That's when my phone started vibrating as Sophie's live stream of the hearing had exploded from hundreds of viewers to tens of thousands. The comments were flying in faster than we could read them, the consensus being that people loved seeing powerful bullies finally cornered. "Your Honor," I said, standing with my grandmother's old portfolio in hand, "I have documents that might clarify Mrs. Slate's actual authority or lack of it over property in this valley." What followed was 30 minutes of unrelenting public dismantling. Judge Rodriguez sifted through every damning piece of evidence via emails between Veronica and Parker, the bank transfers, the shady property filings, each one painting a clearer picture of calculated fraud. The more the judge read aloud, the further Veronica seemed to sink in her chair. The live stream numbers climbed again as people shared the feed with captions like "HOA tyrant gets wrecked in court and watch this corrupt official squirm." And then, just when things felt like they'd peaked, the judge turned her focus to Parker. "Lieutenant, perhaps you can explain your role in this arrangement." Parker stepped forward, his face flushed and his expression tightening into what looked like genuine panic. He tried to frame his department's involvement as nothing more than routine assistance for county code enforcement. But before he could go further, the hearing's video feed split, revealing Police Chief Williams. His tone was measured but carried the unmistakable weight of career-ending judgment. "Lieutenant Parker was never authorized to take part in these enforcement actions," the chief said flatly. "Our internal review has uncovered financial irregularities in his conduct that demand immediate suspension and a criminal investigation." Gasps and murmurs swept through the packed room. On the live feed, thousands of viewers erupted in comments, marveling at the sight of a police officer's career collapsing in front of them. Judge Rodriguez turned her attention to Veronica. "Mrs. Slate," she said, her voice the embodiment of hard-earned intolerance for corruption, "would you care to explain the $8 million you've received from Granite Peak Holdings for development rights you never owned?" The question hit Veronica like a hammer blow. Her carefully cultivated calm shattered. "Those payments were legitimate consulting fees," she insisted, though her words carried no conviction. "Granite Peak is a respected development company with projects across California." That's when Sophie stood, laptop in hand, her expression cool and certain. "Your Honor," she announced, "Granite Peak Holdings was raided by federal agents yesterday morning. The FBI has identified it as a front for money laundering and real estate fraud in 4 states. The air in the room seemed to vanish. On the live stream, the chat exploded with disbelief and exhilaration. Veronica's remaining composure broke entirely. She shot to her feet, her chair clattering to the floor. "Fine," she shouted. "Yes. I took the money at $2 million so far. Granite Peak promised me 5 times that if I delivered the water rights." Her confession hung in the stunned silence, every word broadcast to tens of thousands online. "I earned every penny," she raged. "Do you know how hard it is to move projects forward in a place run by backward farmers who can't see progress when it's right in front of them?" Mackenzie tried desperately to silence her, but Veronica barreled on. "Parker was supposed to handle things quietly. We had a deal of 50 grand to make sure Vail didn't cause problems." Even Parker looked horrified. Judge Rodriguez's gavel cracked sharply against the desk. "Mrs. Slate, you have the right to remain silent, and I strongly advise you to use it." Her gaze swept the room. "Based on the evidence and the admissions we've heard, I'm ordering the immediate dissolution of the Silvercrest Hills HOA board. A court-appointed receiver will take over until the investigation is complete. This matter is also being referred to the FBI and the State Attorney General for criminal prosecution." Applause broke out among the residents as federal marshals entered, moving swiftly to arrest both Veronica and Parker. The live stream surged to its largest audience yet, capturing the side of justice carried out in real time. The fallout was immediate. Within a week, the valley felt like a different place. The morning fog still curled over the hills, but there was a lightness in the air, a shared sense that a crushing weight had finally lifted. From my grandmother's porch, coffee in hand, I watched the sun touch the vines across 70 acres and marveled at the transformation. The footage of Veronica's public collapse had been viewed over 2 million times, spawning endless reaction videos and turning our once local dispute into a national emblem of small communities standing up to entrenched corruption. Legal consequences came fast and hard. Veronica now faced federal charges for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy, with prosecutors determined to make an example of her. Prosecutors sought a 5 to 7-year federal prison sentence for Veronica. Armed with evidence Sophie and I had gathered along with material from FBI raids on Granite Peak Holdings offices across multiple states, the investigation uncovered a web of fraudulent real estate ventures that had drained more than $50 million from communities through fabricated development deals. Lieutenant Parker was fired from the sheriff's department and faced charges for bribery and abuse of power, with authorities demanding he repay the $50,000 he took from Veronica. Even Mackenzie was not spared. He received a 6-month suspension from the state bar for failing to verify his client's claims and engaging in what the board described as ethically compromised enforcement actions. The real victory, though, wasn't just watching the corrupt fire, it was in what happened afterward. The court-appointed receiver officially disbanded the Silvercrest Hills HOA, restoring full property rights to homeowners and removing the oppressive covenants that had once empowered Veronica. The $2 million in fines and recovered funds from her fraudulent dealings were placed into a community trust dedicated to farmland preservation and water conservation across the valley. Former residents unanimously adopted new community standards, this time centered on environmental stewardship rather than superficial control, fully embracing the farming heritage they had once tried to erase. Sophie, who had originally come to the valley for a short break from law school, decided to stay for good. She set up a small agricultural law practice in the renovated barn behind my farmhouse, defending the property rights of small farmers throughout Northern California. One of her first major victories was recovering development fees that 3 local Vineyard families had paid to Veronica's shell company. As a success, it soon brought her a steady flow of similar cases. Over dinner one night, she told me she had learned more about real law in the past month than she had in 3 years at Stanford. The water rights that had been central to our case proved even more valuable than I'd imagined. Our family's controlling share in the Sonoma Valley Water Management Company gave me decisive authority over any project impacting the watershed. Power I used not to stop all growth, but to work with the community on sustainable development guidelines that balanced farming needs with responsible expansion. An unexpected twist came when Marcus Bennett, the same safety inspector who had faked Veronica's video, appeared at my door, hat literally in hand. He offered an apology and asked for honest work as a farm safety consultant. I declined his offer but connected him with a legitimate poultry operation in the next county that needed someone with his skills and willingness to work hard for fair pay. As autumn settled in, the transformation was complete. Former Silvercrest Hills residents were now proud members of an agricultural preserve. Families started small organic gardens, some replaced manicured lawns with native plants, and the community trust had already funded solar-powered irrigation upgrades for several farms, a wetland restoration project that improved the valley's water quality, and a hands-on farming program for city schoolchildren. 6 months after Veronica had first marched onto my property with her clipboard brigade, I stood once again in that same spot. Sophie joined me with 2 coffees and a folder of documents for our latest water conservation effort. She asked if I had always believed we'd win. I thought of the vineyard before us, its healthy rose glistening in the morning light, and played her a voicemail from her great-grandmother or my grandmother, Margaret Vale. Her voice was as clear as the day I first heard it. The land doesn't lie, Ethan. People lie, companies lie, politicians lie, but the land always tells the truth about what it is and what it needs. Real power isn't about controlling people, it's about knowing where you fit in the bigger picture. As her words faded into the quiet morning, I looked out at the thriving vines, clean water, and fertile soil that would endure long after us. That, I told Sophie, was the real secret. True power isn't the loudest voice, it's knowing your rights, honoring your responsibilities, and never letting anyone's greed outweigh your community's future. Knowledge is the most effective weapon against corruption. When you understand your rights and refuse to be intimidated, even the most elaborate schemes fall apart. And when you're prepared to stand your ground, truth will always win.